Members, let's call the committee meeting to order. Today is an extraordinary day. Last week, the Florida House of Representatives took the extraordinary step of subpoenaing witnesses for testimony today. Today, we continue in what is an equally extraordinary step of taking the testimony of those witnesses. As you all know, we recently learned that the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence paid its former CEO, Ms. Tiffany Carr, approximately $7.5 million over a 3-year period. This committee, as well as all of Florida's taxpayers, learned this information only after this committee initiated an investigation into the coalition and its administration of Florida taxpayer dollars. We do have one person from the public wishing to come forward today, Mr. Robert Katz. Please come forward. You're recognized. And just to give you a sense of what we've got here is we've got a hard stop at 7 p.m. and the members may have some questions for you. So if you could keep your comments to 3-4 minutes, that would be great.
I'm a rocket scientist. This is too complicated. Rocket science is easy. So on the 7-hour drive, I scribbled down some notes. I apologize. But thank you so much for this opportunity to address you, all Chairperson Lee, Ranking Member Davis, and esteemed representatives. This is a sad, sad day here for us Floridians, and I'm deeply humbled to be able to address you here on this day. I'm privileged to represent many, many, many victims of domestic violence that are simply too afraid to be able to come here today, afraid of the repercussions, afraid of their perpetrators that are still on the loose with firearms that have not been confiscated, and felons in some cases, felons here in Florida in some cases. So, as abhorrent this WAD phrase and abuse, waste, fraud, and abuse is to the underserved victims by the siphoning off of money, it's even more abhorrent to the victims that not are being underserved but aren't being served at all, which I know you all have alluded to. And there's so many victims that aren't being brought into the system, not being made aware of their rights, and their rights aren't being given to them because of lack of outreach, insufficient awareness that's being created by the coalition and activities. For example, just look at the many, many vulnerable, barely teen girls at the Palm Beach High School. None of those got the services they needed. None of them. So when people stand here and say, oh, everybody's getting the services they need, there's over 80 Floridians that didn't get any services at all. As a matter of fact, they were re-victimized. Part of the root cause of the scandalous lack of outreach, the lack of awareness building, lack of education, the ultimate lack of services can be seen, and yes, of course, as we heard, the siphoning off of funds, but also by looking too narrowly at what domestic violence is about and not looking at all the other forms of domestic violence that are somewhat particularly rampant here in Florida, as we know, like identity theft or identity kidnapping, or I call identity terrorism, financial abuse, which is really a part of domestic violence, which is really theft and embezzlement, and the human trafficking and gun trafficking that is also, as we know, unfortunately very rampant here in Florida. It's not being addressed by the coalition and the shelters here in any large way. Regrettably, the process to establish this alleged coalition here in Florida had the unintended consequences of, in many cases, re-attacking, re-victimizing, and re-terrorizing the abused, the terrorized victims of domestic violence. So there's many wonderful providers. CASA in my region is simply wonderful, but they have the resources only to reach out to very few numbers of the many deserving victims of domestic violence. Further, we have examples throughout the justice system where those who are arrested for attacking their victim are let loose the next day by the judge so they can go out and finish the job and murder, as you probably know in St. Pete, their victim, go back and finish the job. Because the judges aren't aware or uneducated, but they're letting them go.
Mr. Katz, I do want to make sure people have time to ask you questions.
Okay. We have other cases of judges throwing, trying to throw victims of domestic violence in jail based on accusations from the accused, in this case a felon, who violated her injunction. We have other cases where prosecutors simply don't bother to even take the time to talk to a victim, even when there's substantiated pictures of injuries and multiple calls and even visits to the police station. The state's attorney doesn't even bother, can't be bothered to talk to the victim, or just drops the case because, oh, we don't know where the perpetrator is, so we won't be able to bring him into court anyway, so we won't bother. Other examples of the police simply ignoring cyberstalking laws, gun trafficking laws, gun ownership laws by felons, because they say, well, this is hearsay or it's not going to hold up in court, but they're only there to get a piece of the puzzle. All of these cases are so complex for these women that represent many, many years of abuse, and the law enforcement officers are simply looking at that one particular incident, not looking at the totality that's necessary in these complex, very complex cases. And examples of arcane and outdated laws that say in Florida that, yes, you can't be within 500 feet of the victim's house or the victim's car, but it doesn't say you can't be within 500 feet of the victim herself or himself.
Mr. Katz, about 60 seconds, please.
Okay. So, we want to be known not just for Mickey, Pluto, and Palms here in Florida. We don't want to be known for Pulse, Parkland, and Palm Beach High School. And when people think of Florida, we want them to think of Epcot and not Epstein. So we really need to take the silver lining that this opportunity gives us as we're looking and delving into the coalition and building back up not just that organization, but the entire system within Florida of how we look at, how we approach the epidemic of domestic violence.
Thank you, Mr. Katz, and I appreciate that you drove a long way to talk today, and I'm sorry for rushing you.
Sorry.
We are unfortunately coming up on a hard stop.